Hey guys, this is the fourth video in the series I'm doing on testing whether there are any negative side effects from using aluminum oxide or silicon carbide abrasives on high hardness, high vanadium content steels. The knife I've been using for these tests is a Spyderco Mule Team in Maxamet at about 68 Rockwell. And the stone I'm using, or the particular apex finish I'm going to be using for today's test, or this test, is the King 4000. So this is just the other side of my King 1000 4000 combination stone. And so I'm just going to take my Atomo 140 and flatten this stone, and also try and generate a slurry on it. To be perfectly honest, I'm not a huge fan of the King 4000 because it's not soft enough for my taste. I prefer my stones to be extremely muddy, basically as muddy as you can get. The weakest bond stones you can get, pretty much. So this stone isn't quite to my taste because it doesn't release enough grit in use for my taste, but nonetheless, for this test, it is one of the better stones because it gives a fairly nice clean apex line. So we'll certainly be able to get an apex that will push cut newsprint nicely with the grain, if not across it, because with water stones it's kind of finicky off of anything below about an 8000 grit stone to try and get an apex that will push cut newsprint across the grain at 90 degrees, because the slurry that is on top of the stone tends to round over the apex, as I'm sure you guys have heard me say before at this point. But nonetheless, we'll give it a shot. Okay, now need to test. So slicing sharpness is there, so now let's just skip right ahead and see if it'll do cross grain push cuts. Pretty close. You deburr this and it should be good to go, which I'm going to do in a minute. So we might actually be able to use cross-grain push cuts for this test, which would be nice. Okay, so as I've used every time I've been using water stones and I needed to deburr, I use a Spyderco medium sintered ceramic bench stone for that, because deburring on water stones with high angle passes hasn't worked too well for me in my experience. Very low force, at least double the angle that you were using. 2 very, very low force passes, alternating sides, and starting with the side opposite to the last side you were grinding to shear off the burr. And now I'm going to tip this stone and try and get as much of the slurry off of it as possible to minimize rounding. Okay. Alright, we'll give it one more shot, otherwise we'll just use with the grain push cuts. Yeah. It'll do them, but not well enough to start with that I think it might necessarily be a better idea to use with the grain push cuts, so I'll show you both in the beginning so that I can use both in the test. So yeah, with the grain, it's performing quite well. Okay, so let me put this on the side here. Grab some more pine. I gotta use the second piece now, and okay, this is across the grain. This is a funny case where I think the across the grain push cutting sharpness has gone up, because I believe what microburr was left was mostly caught by the wood. So okay, now we'll go with the grain. You can see with the grain is vertical on the newsprint I use, which I chose, by the way, for being the hardest newsprint to do across the grain. There's other newsprint available where I live that's much easier to do across the grain, but that makes it less useful as a test of sharpness. So with the grain, it's still exactly as it was initially. Okay. This is across the grain. And this is with the grain. That's across the grain. A little bit more across the grain. Yeah. And now if I can get that out of the way, I'll do some more with the grain. It's with the grain, as you can see. I don't want to actually go through too much of this piece of pine. I still got to do one more test with it. So I'm going to have to stop here and switch to cardboard. But we'll do one more test across the grain. And with the grain, again, there you go. All right, let's do some cardboard. Well, now I certainly don't expect it to do anything across the grain, which this one will be. Yeah, that's actually not too bad, all things considered. Have another piece across the grain. Yes. And again with the grain. All right, a few more strips of cardboard. can find any of this stuff still that hasn't been used. There was a couple. There we go. That's across the grain. And with the grain. So, there is a large number of shavings on pine done off of a King 4000 on a Spyderco Mule Team in Maxamet at 68 Rockwell, followed by a whole bunch of strips of cardboard across the corrugations, and the initial sharpness barely dropped at all.